Hello, I'm Jonathan Schabowsky, Field CTO at Solace, and I'm so excited to be presenting to you today at the EDA Summit 2023. The topic we're going to discuss is taming your Kafka chaos with an event portal. So, as we see all over our customers, Kafka has continued to explode within the industry, and Kafka is being used for many different use cases at this point. Whether it's data pipelining, microservices-based applications, streaming analytics, real-time data sharing, and so many more different types of use cases. Again, it's really proliferating most large enterprises today. But what we also are seeing is the ability to manage it, govern it, has become really increasingly fragmented, complicated, and almost unable to accomplish. And so, if we take an enterprise, let's say you have an inventory team, they might have chosen Amazon MSK, they're all into Amazon Cloud as an example, and they document things using the Office suite of tools. They put documents in SharePoint, and their team ultimately is responsible for their own documentation within that SharePoint site. The online store team, however, maybe they don't even know much about the inventory team using Amazon. They use Confluent Cloud. They like that Confluent Cloud provides them a software as a service platform. They use Confluent Stream schema registry, and they use GitHub and Backstage to document their different event streams within their team. The in-store team, they have Confluent maybe deployed on a bunch of different customer premises, and they use Confluent schema registry, and they use Confluence pages to document theirs. And then finally, the fraud team, well, nobody ever really knows what the security and fraud team does. We just know that they use Apache Kafka. And so essentially, we have a bunch of different team silos that exist within the enterprise using disparate Kafka technologies. There's limited stream reuse because they don't really know about each other's streaming data because of all of these siloed documentation stores. And to that end, that has created sort of poor and unknown documentation across the teams. And in some cases, the documentation is even poor within teams because the documents get stale over time as things evolve. I know myself, when I worked in industry, I tended to forget to update my documentation, much to the aggravation of other team members. But wait, it even gets worse. We have this pesky thing called the software development lifecycle. We move things from development to test and performance testing to pre-production, ultimately staging, and finally, to the relief of the application teams in most cases, to production. But sure, the inventory team is doing that. So is the online store team and the in-store team. And in fact, typically, most of these different environments have different Kafka clusters with their different technologies and with limited data sharing existing between them. And so what is important to recognize, though, is we have different versions of the Kafka topics and streams, different versions of the corresponding schemas that reside within those streams, and different versions of the applications that are producing or consuming these data streams. It gets very, very complicated, and your ability to understand where things are, where they are in the process, becomes very, very tiresome and cumbersome. So what do we see? Well, everybody has meetings like this. Random drawings on the dry erase boards, attempting to sort of sketch out how data is moving within the enterprise, maybe even just within the production environment, but sometimes data moves from production to staging environments for testing reasons. It's all very, very hard, and everybody is spending way too much time sort of reverse engineering from their understanding of the way that a system actually works versus making use of the Kafka infrastructure to create new and novel use cases. So your life revolves around answering other teams' questions, meetings, and what we call backroom deals. We had a customer recently that said that Kafka data sharing across clusters only happens by somebody of the other team basically knowing somebody in the other team, asking questions around how they could get access to that data, and thus the backroom deal gets made such that they can get access to that data. But then where do those backroom deals even get documented, managed, and maintained? So then this leads to a set of questions. How do you expose your different Kafka data streams? And why would you want to do that? Well, first of all, most people are now looking to try to find solutions to finding events for reuse, what kind of data is available, and how can they solve current business challenges today in real time. How can you understand each event schema or even know who to ask? And how do you know how they're being used? In most cases, a Kafka topic name and a schema name still isn't necessarily providing the business context around what exactly that event represents. Secondly, how do we lifecycle manage these different artifacts? How do you evolve your topics and schemas without breaking consuming applications? Sure, Confluent Schema Registry enables backwards and forwards compatibility checking across your different schemas, but it's always within the scope of the topic within the cluster. How do you look at this holistically? How do you look at this from a data management and schema management perspective across your enterprise? How do you determine the impact of these changes? Who do you need to notify that in upcoming changes of interest? Or in a really bad case, how do you provide the update that maybe the change isn't compatible? How do you enable govern access in data sharing? This becomes a big problem within large enterprises, especially where you have compliance concerns, privacy concerns, and the like. And how do you prove it to regulatory auditors that actually your data sharing is within the policy of the organization? And finally, how do you work to implement best practices? Best practices around topic naming, best practices around schema reuse and references, best practices even down to the approval types of processes as it relates to lifecycle management. And then the last area that often comes up is how do you enable automation? Most organizations are trying to start to provide Kafka more as a platform. And in doing so, they need to provide self-service capabilities to their developers to ultimately increase developer productivity, reduce the strain on the middleware and infrastructure teams, and ultimately enable a good return on value of the Kafka investment. And finally, how do you ensure catalog and the runtime is actually consistent? In my background, working for a lot of large government organizations and large commercial companies, once data gets stale, it's very hard to bring back without reverse engineering. And it's really even hard to know until you get to the runtime that it turns out the documentation and information that you used was actually stale. So anything that becomes manual is destined to become out of synchronization. And so how do we provide automation to ensure that the data and information that's provided, as it relates to exposing these event streams and understanding the schemas, et cetera, is actually the truth of what's going on within the runtime Kafka environment? So this brings about the concept of an event portal. And really, there's a set of required capabilities that an event portal needs to implement in order for you to be successful across the entire lifecycle of managing your Kafka event streams. So the first is, how do you ultimately design an event? An event obviously is a business moment that's relevant to multiple stakeholders and parties within the organization. And that event design, both the topic design as well as the data schema design, is of utmost importance. Secondly, how do you version control and understand what environments these events reside in? Which versions of which events are in the production environment versus the testing environment, which will probably be going to the production environment very soon. How do you do runtime discovery? As I mentioned before in the very first slide, the use of Kafka has proliferated within the enterprise to such an extent that most of our customers are saying, we don't even know what's available in the runtime. In fact, we recently had a customer that said, looking at their Kafka clusters is kind of looking like under the hood of a car. You look in there, you get terrified, and you close the hood as quickly as possible. We obviously need to integrate and bring in all of what existing assets you already have within your Kafka clusters and bring it under control. And that's the concept of runtime discovery. The concept of runtime audit, however, says, well, nothing is static. Your brokers are always getting new topics, new configurations, new schemas are being added. But how do we make sure that the information model that's captured within the event portal remains consistent and synchronized? The capability of a runtime audit enables you to understand what are the discrepancies in configuration, what are the discrepancies that exist between what the design state says should be there, or what the runtime state is presenting is unknown to the design state. These are all runtime audit discrepancies that need to be accounted for, tracked, monitored, and ultimately acted upon. we need to have a catalog and search filter. The ability to reuse event streams is only possible if a human, such as myself, can actually find the information in an event stream that solves a given use case. So you typically need rich filtering capabilities, rich searching capabilities, and understand that any information within the event portal needs to become searchable in order to find ultimately what someone is looking for and make reuse. Dependency management is such an important key. Remember how we talked about the ability to understand what the impact of a change would be? Well, if I'm consuming an event stream, I absolutely want the provider to understand that I exist, what my unique needs are, and ultimately ensure that upstream or downstream dependencies are maintained and kept in mind through the entire lifecycle management process. The ability to understand these dependencies is kind of key, and a graphical visualization of these dependencies, as well as the overall ability to design event-driven architectures, is very important. The ability to integrate with your existing tool chain within your enterprise, whether that's GitHub Actions, Ansible, Terraforms, etc. All of the different tooling integrations are very important to an event portal. Most enterprises don't have just Kafka, they have many other broker types such as ActiveMQ, RabbitMQ, TIBCO EMS, IBM MQ. So in a perfect world, an event portal would be able to support these multiple broker types. And finally, design and runtime analysis. And what that is the ability to understand reuse factors, have KPIs around how many topics are getting reused by how many different clients. Is that factor growing? In other words, are you making more reuse out of your data? Or conversely, are you primarily a Kafka user that has a lot of point-to-point style integrations, in which case, the publish and subscribe model of Kafka would definitely enable a lot better outcomes if you probably made use of more of that data. So those are the key capabilities of an event portal. And of course, I'm happy to share that the Solace event portal for Kafka implements many of those capabilities. In fact, the event portal for Kafka's mission statement is to catalog, discover, visualize, govern, and manage your Kafka event-driven assets. So whether you've got the open source distribution of Apache Kafka, aka you're not paying licensing fees to anyone, or you're using Confluence distribution of Apache Kafka, you're using Amazon's distribution of Apache Kafka, Amazon MSK. Basically, if you've got Kafka, we have a solution for you. And that solution is the Solace event portal for Kafka, which allows you to catalog all of your Kafka event streams while also understanding the total life cycle of what all is available on each cluster, how are they all interdependent, all in a nice visual way. So what does the event portal for Kafka actually do? So if we take an example, there's a commonly read book out there, Designing Event-Driven Systems by Ben Stratford. It's a fantastic book. I've really enjoyed reading it. If we take their example, they say, look at an example Kafka enterprise, right? I think this is a retail type use case where they're using Kafka. They have a collection of different applications that are leveraging Kafka event streams, topics like baskets and catalogs and users and orders. And in many cases, you've got a bunch of different, events streams that are being consumed by multiple applications. So for instance, the catalog service obviously produces and consumes to the catalog, but the catalog filter view consumes it, the shipment service consumes it, etc. So essentially, kind of going back again a few slides, remember how we drew, there's a bunch of people drawing things on dry erase boards, kind of like the one behind me. The idea is these things all get stale and out of date. So what if we could replace that picture with actually a picture that's generated largely from your Kafka cluster? What are the applications that are consuming and producing? These are all listed similarly to the book. And then here in the middle are your different Kafka event streams. We have basket, catalog, customer, etc., all with the dotted lines and lines dictating who's publishing, who's subscribing, etc. And a lot of this information can actually be consumed from your Kafka clusters today and imported into the event portal with very little effort. Now, there is, of course, effort to determine, for instance, who's the producer of these things, but in most cases, you are all subject matter experts in your domain and can just provide that to the model. Once that's provided to the model, now you're able to map all of these things to what's available in your different clusters from a lifecycle management perspective. All of that is imported by the event management agent, which is actually an open source tool that can integrate with many other broker types. And finally, once that's imported, it's then put into the catalog, available for new design, so that everyone within your organization that has the ability to use Kafka or want to understand what's available within Kafka now has a single place across the enterprise to go to understand exactly what's available. And one dimension that this picture doesn't show is the way that the event portal enables application team dynamics to occur. All of these things are owned by what we call application domains. Those application domains are what really enable these team dynamics to work together, but all while enabling event streams to be shared across the enterprise. It's actually a fantastic product, which I think all of you should try. Remember also, though, I said a key capability of an event portal is the ability to integrate with existing tooling. Well, there's a lot of reasons of why you'd want to integrate with existing tooling, from your ability to collaborate about the different event streams that exist within the organization, maybe via a tool like Slack, or maybe you have your overall application architecture documented in Confluence, but you want the event-driven part, which obviously the event portal can maintain for you, to be referenced within your Confluence documentation and kept in sync. Maybe you want to develop new event-driven applications and tooling like IntelliJ, where you'd like a plugin that automatically allows a developer to see the catalog, right-click on things, import them into their projects, generate code, etc. Of course, source control, you want to leverage GitHub Actions, all of these kinds of things leading to your CI/CD pipeline, the configuration of the Kafka cluster itself. And finally, you want to be able to test and monitor. All of these things are possible through our API that exists on the event portal for Kafka implementation, and enables all of these types of integrations so that really your developers can continue to use the same software development lifecycle and tooling that they're used to, but all aided by the ability of the event portal backend to keep track of all of these dependencies and ultimately provide a positive developer experience when using your Kafka infrastructure. So there's really 3 steps to taming your Kafka chaos. The first step is understanding what you have and where it's available. So what we would say is identify all the different Kafka clusters that you have within your enterprise. What's available in your production environment, testing environment, development environment, etc. So once you've figured out what clusters you have, you can then install our runtime agent. And our runtime agent will allow you to discover and import the different topics, consumer groups, and schemas that are available within each of these clusters, and obviously the corresponding Confluent schema registry. Once you've imported that information into the event portal for Kafka, you're then able to consolidate the documentation. Now all of the documentation around your event streams can reside within the event portal and maintain and be up to date. All of that then leads to, now you have this catalog that has all of your event streams in there with all of the dependencies, context information, and that is what fundamentally will enable data democratization and reuse across your enterprise. Because ultimately, if you can't find it, you can't reuse it. And you can't democratize something that isn't reusable. So the next step would be, how do you keep all of this up to date and ultimately increase the agility of your organization? Well, first would be, look at how you can integrate the event portal into your existing software development lifecycle. As an example, we've been working with a very large retailer in Europe around integrating the event portal via GitHub Actions, using Ansible in order to provision resources in the runtime, using approval processes like ServiceNow, and ultimately using IntelliJ plugins to enable Java development, for instance, of new applications. So that's an example of how you could integrate the event portal into your software development lifecycle in order to have better agility and keep things synchronized. The idea here is that from the initial concept of how you could reuse an event stream, the designing of that application and maybe new topics that get produced by that application, and to the deployment and production and everything in between, the event portal is there to just guide your teams in order for them to do this in a very quick way, in an agile way, but still within a managed and governed structure. And finally, the third step would be improve and optimize. Most companies these days have API teams. These API teams, again, are responsible for establishing best practices across the enterprise for APIs, conventions, governing the APIs, and ultimately even governing the taxonomies of how their APIs are used. What are the experience APIs, et cetera. The same concept that can actually be reused for your event streams. What are the naming conventions that you want to use organizationally? How do you want to govern access to these event streams? How do you want to manage the different taxonomies of how those streams are broken up? And then finally, how do you monitor KPIs? Again, it's, if you can't measure it, it's really hard to see if you're making progress. So wouldn't it be great to be able to understand how for each topic, is topic reuse going up? What about at the application domain level? Which application domains are having the best amount of reuse? Finally, at the overall enterprise level, which is your overall KPI of topic reuse, as an example, getting better, or is it declining? All of these things allow you to optimize both your processes of how you're using the event portal and to ensure, again, that you're making a good investment decision by both using the event portal as well as your overall Kafka event-driven architectures. So finally, to conclude, my belief is, and I think many people now are coming to the same conclusion, that Kafka enterprises really need something like an event portal. Whether it's enterprise-wide cataloging of the event streams to enable better data discovery, reuse, and high-value data, or governing access to ensure security compliance, the use of the catalog is vital in order to really use Kafka effectively. Secondly, application onboarding and automation is another area. So if you're, for instance, being asked by your overall organization to provide Kafka as a platform to the entire enterprise, overall, what you need to be really focused on is how do you provide a better onboarding experience for developers? How do you ultimately almost encourage developers to make use of your Kafka platform in an easy way? How do you enable developers to give the requirements of their event streams to you so that the topic recipes, if you will, can be made within the infrastructure to support the use case? All of this can result in faster time to value and agility if you provide that kind of an experience. And then you can also ensure that the Kafka runtime is set up exactly for what the developers' use cases are requiring, and that you have consistency in both expectations that the developers would be expecting that the runtime is providing them, along with documentation consistency, so that as teams change, people come in and out of the organization, you always know that you have a place for developers to understand what is actually going on, and a place for you as the infrastructure team to understand what's going on. And then finally, bimodal software development lifecycle support. We are not here to basically say we have a new software development lifecycle. Most organizations have a software development lifecycle that they're quite happy with. We simply think that the event portal needs to integrate with your existing software development lifecycle, integrate with your existing tooling, let application teams focus on their applications and not the infrastructure. I know myself as a previous application developer that in most cases, it's really hard for me to even understand how all the infrastructure works. So if you could provide me an easy means to support all of the things I have to do with my software development lifecycle, while enabling me to make use of a common infrastructure, that would be the holy grail for me. And finally, I just want to sort of add that governance equals more resilient systems as long as governance isn't heavy-handed. And so we purposely built the event portal for Kafka to enable the least amount of governance, but where needed, governance to enable things like privacy and protection, approvals, and so that ultimately, again, you know what's going on within your Kafka infrastructure. So that's my presentation. I hope all of you will take time out of your day to go to solace.com, look up the event portal for Kafka, understand what capabilities it provides, maybe take it for a free trial, reach out to us with any questions that you have during your evaluation. And I look forward to seeing all of you using the event portal in the next year. Thank you.